there's a lot of people that aren't happy about it. So what did I do? I wanted to become a little more informed because I don't know Joe Brady at all other than, us watching him call plays. And I don't even know. Maybe I've met him and shook his hand once. I don't even remember. I don't know that we've ever had a conversation.
Tiger. Don't forget about that.
LSU Tiger, great.
Won a natty.
And what do I remember about him from the Bills? If you remember in 2023, Ken Dorsey was calling the plays.
Yep.
The Bills had lost 4 or 6 games. They're sitting at 5-5. Dorsey gets fired. Joe Brady comes in, and the offense has been in a much better place since then. If we think back to those days, they were dark.
Yep.
I think the other funny thing is if this happens last year, let's say, because those same Bills fans that are texting me have been frustrated with McDermott for a while with the performance in the playoffs. Will we ever get over the hump? If this happens last year and McDermott gets fired after the playoffs and Joe Brady gets hired as the head coach after guiding Josh Allen to an MVP season and having the number 2 offense in the league, are they as upset? I don't know. Maybe not. But I think it's important when you're looking at these, like we're so myopic and focused exactly in the times.
Yep.
Like let's all just kind of zoom out and get some perspective. So what did I do? I called Brandon Beane and actually texted him, and then we got on the phone together. Surprised that we were having the conversation, but Brandon's the guy over the years that, sorry, I just moved my computer, that I've been into, met with and talked to, and I'm always curious. And I think the feeling, as you've seen on the internet, after Sean McDermott was fired with the Bills was, why was Brandon Beane not fired? They are a package deal. He should have been gone. I didn't ask Brandon anything about that. I just said, dude, talk to me about this process. Talk to me about Joe Brady. Okay.
Yep.
And here's what he said. So the biggest thing that he was telling me was, in this process, a big part of it was we wanted a CEO. They weren't going to chase this guy that was a schemer. They weren't going to chase like this awesome play caller. They wanted a CEO. And I think you've talked about this before. Sean McVay, obviously we've talked about, wow, he can dial it up. He's a great schemer, but like that's what he is, and that's what he's become as a CEO of this organization for the Rams. Vrabel's the same way. DeMeco Ryans is the same way. Dan Campbell's the same way. But those 3 guys are ex-players, right? And I think when he talks about CEO, I just wanted him to describe that a little bit more for me. Like, what does that mean? And he said a really big thing for him going into this, first of all, was they started at square one from Joe Brady. He assured me, because I asked some of the same questions that a lot of these fans are asking, like, so was this was what it was all along? Was this Joe Brady was the clear-cut guy? That's why we fired McDermott? He said, no. Honest to God, no. Joe Brady was just another candidate, and every candidate started at square one. So he assured me of that. So I said, okay, I feel good about that. But the biggest thing that he said was we wanted a guy that knows what makes players tick, a guy with high emotional intelligence. We didn't want the guy that would go lock himself away in his office when adversity hit and, start scheming up plays and doing all this cool stuff and drawing things up. Like, we wanted a guy that was going to have a great feel for the building. So that was some important things that they were talking about with who was going to come in next. And I feel like in this process, as coaching is getting younger, we've talked about this, and maybe this was the Mike McDaniel thing when he got hired by Miami, but there was a bad trend for a while of we got to hire the youngest, coolest offensive mind in football.
Yep.
And I think, aside from the Brandon Beane stuff, I think that the NFL is moving away from that a little bit. And I think guys like Vrabel, what we've seen is they are CEOs. They are guys that can get in front of a room. We talk about leader of men. We talk about guys that make the building better, have a good feeling for the pulse of the building. I think that was important for him to see in this process. It was actually cool just to have an open, transparent conversation with Brandon about, like, okay, so CEO, what about Joe Brady screams CEO to you?
Yeah.
And, I told you earlier, like, sitting there assuring that, like, look, everybody started at square one. one of the things he said was, we wanted to make sure everybody was on equal footing to start, because sometimes you have guys in organizations that will go on somewhere else and become a great head coach, and you didn't give them a fair shake or a fair look just because they were under the old regime. And he wanted to make sure that in that regard too, that like Joe Brady was going to get a fair shake just like everybody else. All right. So he told me that he learned a lot about Joe in the process. Joe has been an offensive coordinator. I talked to you about like his origin story of being the quarterback coach and then moving up to the OC. And, in terms of the offensive rankings and things, he's been pretty good in Buffalo. There's still some things. I share some frustration with the fans when you watch the offense.
Yeah.
I want a little more complexity. I want to put a little bit more on Josh in terms of the mental side of it. I think there are things they can do there to still improve. But Joe Brady as this CEO, all right, so they're able to sit him down and ask him a lot of questions they've never heard him answer before. So simple things on like, how were you raised? Where were you raised? How would you run a team or an organization? So like really simple personal questions that some of it they probably knew, some of it they didn't, to his vision of what he would do. And then from there, I think they could get a lot more granular with like, okay, for this specific organization, for this specific team, like what do you see? What are our needs? What do we need to get better at? What is good? What's working well? And I think that he just wowed him in the process. And part of it was
That's awesome.
They know he's a great communicator. They know he's got high energy. But the thing you see about him all the time is he's steady, right? I mean, I think the days where we see these, Bill O'Brien, his early on in his coaching career, they used to call him the teapot, right? Because he would get so pissed and you see the steam coming out of his ears and then it would all just go kaboom. I don't think you really see that a whole lot anymore out of this new wave of coaches. And so I think that steadiness is something that's a good thing for these candidates. But
yeah, I think that's an interesting point you bring up, like getting to know them in that level, because talking to some other guys, because I kind of reached out when this hiring cycle started. I love to do this. Like I've talked to Brandon Beane, I've talked to other guys, presidents of teams, like, because I like to reach out, even though I really have no skin in the game for any of this type stuff, and I'm not going to report it or do any of that. I'm not interested in that, but I like to just kind of get an idea of like how certain candidates interview and like what goes into that. And like, why wouldn't you, like when you see some of these young OCs, right, that are young, not even OCs, some of them haven't even called plays, that are interviewing for head coach jobs. I'm always like, when you say somebody got picked to interview for the offensive coordinator position, or they got picked to interview for the head coach position, is it that different? Like, how do you not know these things? And so to hear from the inside of those guys of like, no, like an OC interview is totally different.
Extremely different.
The entire time they're focused on scheme. They're not really getting asked culture questions. They're not getting asked things that have to do that, because think about it. The head coach is in charge of all that. They really don't have say in a lot of those type things, right? So they're just kind of getting an idea of how you teach, what your schemes are, like what you would do in certain situations, how you handle those situations, and situational master type stuff. And then also like the depth of where your scheme comes from and where you want to go with it and what you see their players doing that fits in your scheme, or maybe like how you would adjust to what they do well. Like that's the kind of stuff they're talking about. And that's really it. And then when you get into head coaching, it's not a whole lot about the offensive scheme. It's more of, all right, if you're the dude in the room with the voice, this interview is built around, we're hiring a CEO. So if you're at a company, think of the difference in like hiring the CEO and somebody who's going to do sales. Like that, like it's that different of an interview. So that's really how it goes into it. And so when you're like, man, it, like the first thing it registered to me, and I'm sure it will to some fans, when you said, man, they got to ask him how he grew up and how he, I'm like, God, they don't ask him that all the time, but then you go, no, why would they? Because they're just talking about offensive schemes. So I think that's one of the most interesting parts to me of these hiring processes, is getting to know what those interviews are really like. And I think it'd be fun, Fitz. We'll have to get some GMs on here this offseason and talk a little bit about that. That'd be great to kind of hear the difference in those different meetings. Yeah,
I think that would be awesome. And I think we've talked about this before too, like just being in a position of leadership.
Yep.
It's a lonely, lonely job. When you're
people don't
top,
talk to you, they don't want to say hey in the building, they're nervous, they stop conversations when you walk through, like but Sean tells me that all the time.
But I'm even just talking about like you're the final decision maker. So like Sean, the coach Sean, like the things that he does, like it's very much you win or you lose, and if you lose, you didn't do the right thing, and if you win, then you get celebrated and you pass it on to your players. And Sean does a great job of that. But the GM's the same thing. So it's like, how do you take the emotion out of these decisions? You got to be able to somehow take the emotion out. You can't be reading, X all the time and what everybody else is saying. And like, in your heart of hearts, you're doing what you think is best for the organization. Because guess what? If Joe Brady's not a good head coach, Brandon Beane is getting fired.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
I just feel like the easiest thing for Brandon Beane to have done was to not hire Joe Brady.
Right.
That would have made it a lot easier, because then
the splashy OC guy, everybody
you don't know who it is.
He's swinging.
We got a young guy. We're bringing in some new blood. I get it, but he kind of had me convinced by the end how impressive Joe Brady was in these interviews, because that was the hardest of all the decisions, was to say, you know what? We just told you we're getting rid of Sean McDermott because we need a change. And now we're hiring the offensive coordinator who's been here the last few years. Yeah. So I think that's what took Bills fans by surprise. But I think he was surprised a little bit in the interviews at how impressive Joe Brady was, especially in that CEO role, with the entire vision of what he saw for the organization, his emotional intelligence, his ability to interact and be with everybody in the whole building, to have a great feel for the vibe of it. I think they've been pretty successful on offense. There do need to be some changes for sure. They're going to have to, unfortunately, Cromer, which is one of the guys we wouldn't have wanted to change and retired. So they're going to have to find a new offensive line coach. But it's not like we're starting like the New York Jets or the New York Giants. This isn't a complete teardown rebuild, right? We've got some pieces here. So I don't know. I was with a lot of Bills fans when I first heard the news. I got a bunch of people texting me. I'm thinking, oh, somebody's got to help me figure this one out. But I did have the ability to sit and talk and listen and ask questions to Brandon Beane. And he was nice enough and gracious enough to give me his time. And by the end of the conversation, the answers that he gave me to all the questions that I had has me intrigued. It has me intrigued to see what Joe Brady, the head coach and CEO of the Buffalo Bills, is going to be like, what changes are now going to be made. But I think the important thing for all fans, when people make decisions, they don't make decisions that are going to win the Twitter wars. They're not thinking about today. They're not thinking about what the media is going to say about it. Yeah, you're doing what's best for what you think is what's best for the organization. And we're going to see next fall, right? This is going to be measured, this decision, by wins and losses, because guess what, Joe Brady? The expectation next year isn't going to be to get to the playoffs. It's only going up. And it's not going to be to win a game in the playoffs. It's going to be to win the Super Bowl. That's the goal, and that's the expectation for next year. And I think he
about
knows
this,
to lofty expectations.
Think about how much all those guys are screwed because of what Mike McDonald just did. I mean, you just flipped a team in a matter of absolutely no time. In 2 years.
What about Mike Vrabel? What about Mike Vrabel, who did it in 1 year?
Two guys right now that are in the Super Bowl, every coach and GM that's not on those two teams is going, we're screwed. This is now the new expectation. Vrabel comes in, he takes his first-year team to a Super Bowl. Mike McDonald comes in, and in 2 years, he's got the best defense in the league. Sam Darnold looks like the guy he originally was picked to be, like a really special football player. Like, man, it's like now the pressure and the stakes, they just got higher. And now, Joe Brady, you got Josh Allen, one of the best players on the planet. The expectations are not going to be, we hope to see some progress. They are going to be, we got to be playing in the Super Bowl next year. That's going to be the expectation.